This week on the Destination Angler.
And suddenly he looks out of the corner of his eye, and coming from the left side, here comes all of his mules, and they get between the guests and the bear, and they pin their ears against their necks, which is a sign that they're angry. Their mouths are open so they can bite, and they go tearing across the meadow at this bear, and they're going to attack the bear, and the bear turns tail and runs across the meadow and disappears out of the meadow.
Like shoulder to shoulder? The mules are all together like that?
Oh, yeah, all side by side. Yep, they all come together as a group and just chase the bear off.
And nobody trained them to do this. They just do this naturally.
No, this is a natural instinct.
Wow. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. And by Anglers Coffee, elevating the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. Subscribe today. And by JP Ross Fly Rods, makers of happiness one rod at a time. Get outside and simply fish. Coming up on the Destination Angler, we're taking a detour to the other side of the world, to the South Island of, you guessed it, New Zealand, for some of the finest trout fishing in the world. Then we're back in the States for some world-class spring creek fishing. That's right, Silver Creek in the great state of Idaho. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler with expert fly angler, guide, and passionate conservationist Ryan Walker with Ozark Smallmouth Fly Company. Ryan gives us the rundown on top streams in the Ozarks, including his home waters, the James River, top fly patterns by the season, plus stories of meanmouth bass and Ozark bald knobbers. You won't want to miss these shows, and be sure to check out our Instagram and Facebook pages where we post pictures of the destinations we cover and top fly patterns recommended by our guests. And folks, I just wanted to say it's super gratifying to receive your notes of appreciation. Thank you for listening and for spreading the word about the podcast. Today, our destination is the wild and woolly backcountry of Yellowstone National Park, and our guest is backcountry outfitter and fly angler Shane McClaflin with Sunrise Pack Station. Yellowstone National Park has the highest concentration of public lakes and rivers anywhere in the world. It's an amazing place with world-renowned fisheries such as the Lamar, Beckler, Slough Creek, the Yellowstone River, and more backcountry angling than you can fish in a lifetime. Anglers who are willing to do some hiking are rewarded with gold medal fly fishing in a pristine wilderness setting. Folks, these are experiences of a lifetime, the ones you'll be telling your grandkids about for years to come. Shane has been guiding anglers into the backcountry for 30 years, and man, does he have some stories. You're going to hear stories of John Colter and Blackfeet Indians, mules and grizzly bears, and wolves eating fly rod cases. You'll find out where the top fishing spots are in the backcountry, must-have fly patterns, and an update on the Thorofare, the most remote region in the lower 48. So saddle up the packhorses and the mules as we head into the backcountry with Shane. And if you want to learn more about fishing the park, check out my episode from February of 2021 on Slough Creek. Also, my good buddy Dave Stewart from the Wet Fly Swing podcast has a couple of really great episodes on Yellowstone and the greater Yellowstone region. So head on over to the Wet Fly Swing and check out episodes number 269 and 227. Shane, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited to talk about one of my favorite places in the world, Yellowstone National Park. I got to start. What's a pack station?
Yeah, well, and that's a common question I get. Pack stations were actually first kind of set up in California in the Sierras, and everybody would go to the station at the base of the mountain, load on the horses, and then head up the mountain, and they would provide everything you need for that trip into the Sierra Nevada.
Okay. All right. So that name's just sort of carried over then, huh, into what you guys do.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, and tell us what is your business all about? So obviously you run backcountry angling trips, but tell us a little bit about your business and what you do.
So Sunrise Pack Station is a company that I kind of started, but also inherited, not from a family member, but from the man who taught me to pack and helped me get started in the backcountry. So Dick Clark used to run Fox Creek Pack Station down in Driggs, Idaho, and he ran trips into the backside of the Tetons and all over Yellowstone National Park. And working with him, he trained me how to run backcountry trips and how to think about the backcountry. When I first came into Yellowstone Park in the Tetons, my idea was I wanted to go build a cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere and, kind of hermit up and have my horses and have my life. And I realized working with Dick that Yellowstone and the Tetons and really many backcountry places are meant to be shared. So I can go back there and look at it and enjoy it and absorb it all. But what good does that do me? So I learned from Dick that when I'm in the backcountry, there's such depth to what I'm looking at and such depth to what I'm hearing and seeing and smelling that I want to learn about that depth. So I learned about the trees and the birds and the flowers and the history, the geology, and really got a whole understanding of Yellowstone and the Tetons. And then he helped instill in me a desire to share that with other people. And that's what Sunrise Pack Station is. It's a place where we take people out into the backcountry and we share the backcountry and the depth of the backcountry with them. Because we can take them into Yellowstone and say, here you go. And they can stand there and look and say, wow, that's a beautiful place. But they don't really know what they're looking at. They see a pretty mountain. But if I tell them, well, that's Electric Peak, and it got the name because of the number of lightning strikes up there. And then you start telling them stories about ranger friends of mine that I know who have tried numerous times to get to the top of it and couldn't make it to the top because thunderstorms come in and the lightning gets so heavy they have to turn back. I mean, it makes suddenly this simple mountain that you saw moments ago become, wow, that's an amazing, dangerous, frightening, exciting mountain. And then we'll do a ride up to Electric Pass, right, just below the peak. And as they cross over that pass, we stop, have lunch, and then I tell them from the peak or the point of the pass, and they look out over all of Yellowstone Park, and they can see that Yellowstone's a caldera. But if they're sitting on the top of that, that pass, and they're looking out over the park, if they don't know what a caldera is, that it's an old volcano that has exploded and collapsed on itself and forms a big bowl, then they don't understand what they're looking at. And then we start talking about, so this is a big bowl that holds water. So Yellowstone has tons of water, nice lakes, nice rivers, lots. I mean, many of our major rivers in the western United States start in Yellowstone Park.
Right.
So the Snake River starts there. The Madison River starts there. The Yellowstone actually starts just above it, but runs through it. It has one of the largest lakes at high elevation as anywhere in the world. I mean, so to give them those details, help them to see what they're, to understand what they're looking at. Then I know that I've done my job. And then when they walk away, they're like, wow, that's an amazing place. And when you learned about a place and you have the depth of understanding of a place, then you want to protect it. So then when they hear about something going on in Yellowstone, then they say, oh, well, maybe I'm going to give to the Yellowstone Foundation and see if I can help preserve that and protect that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And that's my goal, is to help educate people so that they will love the place as much as I do, and then protect it and pass it on to the future generations. My kids have been through Yellowstone, but I don't have grandkids yet, and I want to make sure it's there for when my grandkids go through.
Sounds like there's a story around every corner if you know the history of Yellowstone.
And absolutely, that is absolutely true.
Yeah. And I've read a bunch of mountain man books, and one of them that was just so fascinating was the story of John Colter. And I wonder if you could kind of tell that story, because he's the first guy that kind of stumbled through Yellowstone, correct? The first white man anyway. Right.
And we're not even 100% sure who all has been through Yellowstone. What John Colter gave us is someone who was able to record it and tell somebody else about it who could write it down. And he was an educated man. And what makes John Colter interesting is how he got there. So John Colter came with the Lewis and Clark expedition, and they came up the Missouri River. They went along the Missouri. They hit the Jefferson over the mountains down into the Pacific. They did their whole exploration, and then they're on their way home. And on their way home, they have Lewis and Clark split up on their way home. And one went up the Gallatin River, which is right here in the Gallatin Valley where I live. He actually went about less than a mile from where I'm sitting right now, and he camped and stayed before he went over the pass. So this was Clark. Lewis followed the Missouri up, and then he tried to go up the Marias River. He was still looking for that northwest passage, so he thought maybe the Marias River would go, because it headed northwest, and he thought, well, maybe this is the way. So he headed up the Marias River and found that one, it doesn't go across the mountains, and two, there's a whole lot of Blackfeet up there that don't want you there. So they had a battle, and he ended up turning and heading back. So he floated the Missouri the rest of the way around. Clark went over the pass right beside Bozeman Pass right here. He went over Bozeman Pass, got down on the Yellowstone River, and floated the Yellowstone down. And then the two of them met at the confluence of the Yellowstone and the Missouri. And at that point, they joined up as a full party again, and they started floating down the Missouri. And as they're floating down the Missouri, they run into a group of men coming up the Missouri. And that group of men said, we would like to build a fort up, where you guys have been. And we wonder, is there anybody in your party who would be willing to turn around and go back in and guide us and help us find a good place to build a fur fort where we could trade with the natives around furs? So we'll trade them goods and they'll give us furs and we'll make some money. And Lewis and Clark immediately said, no, we came out as a group, we're going back as a group, and we have only lost one man on our party, and that man died in Mandan before they even, got too far along on their journey, because he got appendicitis. And at that time, appendicitis was lethal. Nobody knew what it was, and it would just take your life. And so it was something they couldn't even control. So they said, we've come as this group, we're going to finish as a group. But then they paused and they said, well, maybe we should at least ask. So they asked their group and said, does anybody want to turn around? And I'm sure they're thinking, why in the world would anyone want to turn around after doing this for 2.5, 3 years without seeing civilization, without seeing family? And John Colter said, well, I might like to do that. And they said, okay, well, let's ask the party. So they asked the whole group, and they had to be unanimous. If anybody said, no, we'd like to finish as a group, then they were going to finish as a group. And they all unanimously said that John Colter was such a faithful hunter, guide, helper for them, that if he wanted to turn around and go back, that they would be willing to release him. And he was released, and he turned around and headed up. And as he headed up, so the person he was leading was a guy named Manuel Lisa. And Manuel Lisa was going to build Fort Lisa, and he headed up. They ended up going on the Yellowstone River and followed the Yellowstone up a ways. They built their fort, and then Lisa said, well, now we need to let the Native Americans know that we're here. So, John, would you be willing to go for a walk and let them know? So John said, sure. He walked up the Yellowstone River through what's now Paradise Valley into the upper Yellowstone region, which is now called Yellowstone National Park. He passed through Yellowstone National Park. He went south, came out on the Snake River, followed the Snake River down into what's now Jackson, the town of Jackson. It's called Jackson Hole. And anytime you hear the word hole, that's just the mountain man term for a valley. So there's Jackson Hole, and then he went across Jackson Pass into what's known as Pierre's Hole, or now we call it the Teton Valley, and headed up Pierre's Hole through Island Park, and then got on to the Gallatin River and came back. He took the Gallatin River back into the Gallatin Valley, back over the pass, Bozeman Pass, where he had been with Captain Clark, and then back onto the Yellowstone River and back down to Manuel Lisa's Fort. It was a huge journey. I mean, a long walk. And he talked to numerous tribes, a whole bunch of different tribes. But when he came back, he started telling them about the things he saw. And he said, I was in this place on the upper Yellowstone, and there was this mud that actually boiled out of the ground. You couldn't touch it. It was so hot. And he said there was steam coming out of holes in the ground, and it smelled like sulfur. And there was white rocks that were hot, and there was boiling water, and there was acid. And people said, man, that sounds like hell, fire and brimstone. So the first name for the upper Yellowstone was called Colter's Hell. And that was the first name of Yellowstone Park. So as we go through the park, and I'm riding with these people, and we're riding those trails that John Colter walked, and I'm telling them, this is, you're standing in the spot that this happened or that happened. it really makes it come alive.
Yeah, you really help them kind of interpret what they're seeing then, don't you?
Exactly. And that's kind of what our goal is when you have someone who's looking, I mean, it's like people who don't speak the language. They need an interpreter. And that's my goal and my guide's goal is to interpret the land and interpret the place to help them understand the story.
So I was in Colorado last summer and came across this really incredible app called Trout Routes. You know, if you've ever looked for a good map to help you with anything from public access to finding the best trout streams in a given area, I highly recommend checking out Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out every stream by state with very detailed access maps for every stream, and they have over 15 different map layers with hundreds of thousands of access points. They also have local fly shops, the ability to take notes, and even local stream regulations, and you can download maps for offline use. Today, Trout Routes covers 23 states, including Montana, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, West Virginia, and more. And they will be adding 10 more states this year, including states like Utah and New York. So if you have an upcoming trip or looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Don't leave home without it.
Hi, I'm Joe Monahan, founder of Angler's Coffee. As a lifelong coffee professional and fly fishing enthusiast, I know how well the two go together. That's why we've created a complete range of fresh roasted coffee blends and roasts, guaranteed to please even the most selective coffee lover. We start by searching the world for only the highest quality coffee beans, which are roasted and blended daily in small batches. All orders are filled and shipped quickly to ensure that your coffee arrives at peak freshness. Check out our fan favorites, such as the ever-popular Caddis blend, featuring medium roasted beans from Central America and Indonesia that are blended for a perfect balance of smooth flavor and body. If you prefer darker roasts, Muddler's Blend, with deep bold flavor and subtle notes of a single malt scotch. And with our subscription model, you can enjoy your favorite Angler's Coffee blend delivered right to your doorstep on a schedule of your choice. All of our coffee is backed by our 100% satisfaction, no questions asked guarantee. Our products also make great gifts for that hard-to-buy angler who will think of you with every sip. Oh, and a percentage of each and every sale goes directly to nonprofit organizations that directly impact our fly fishing community. So head on over to anglerscoffee.com to check out our great selection of coffee and merchandise and the organizations that we support. For home, work, on the boat, or streamside, that's Angler's Coffee.
What's incredible about Colter is I think the guy was captured by Blackfeet once and stripped naked and told to take off and run. And he had to run all the way, I think it was like 60 miles or something. And he outran a tribe of Blackfeet, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And it happened in Three Forks, which is a town just west of me. And you can walk right in that general area where he was. And it was at the confluence of Madison, Jefferson, and Gallatin Rivers. And he was captured by the Blackfeet, and they made him run the gauntlet. But it turns out he was a faster runner than they expected. And there were two people with him. So he was in the boat with, I think it was Tom Fitzpatrick, who was another famous mountain man.
Okay.
And Tom Fitzpatrick didn't drop. I mean, they're out there in the river. This is in the fall, and they're trapping beaver, because the best time to trap beaver is when they're in their thickest, fullest coats. So you want to be early or late fall, early winter, before they get skinny, because and they get a rough coat because they don't have enough to eat. So you want to get them at their prime. So they're hunting when it's cold out there, and they're out there in the boat, and suddenly, they're in the water, trapping beaver, and they're in a canoe and moving around, and they look up and they're surrounded on the shore by a whole bunch of Blackfeet braves. And the Blackfeet have been convinced by the French. So it was the French first and then the British later. So the British had Canada and the United States had, America, and the territories out here in the West were still being explored. And the British, when they came up to the Blackfeet, they said, you know what, if you look at us, we come, we trap, and then we leave. But he said, if you look at those Americans, they come, they trap, and they stay. So you want to get rid of the Americans because they're going to take your land. We're not going to take your land. We're just helping you. So they convinced, and it didn't take a lot of convincing, because the Blackfeet were a very independent tribe anyways. They fought with everybody around them, not just the Americans.
Right.
And so they knew we need to get rid of all whites because whites are going to take over our territory. So they, here they had surrounded John Colter and Tom Fitzpatrick in their boat, and they said, drop your weapons. And Tom slowly starts to reach for his rifle, and in a second, he's a porcupine. I mean, they shot him full of arrows.
Oh, really?
And he fell out of the boat, and he's dead. So he's dead. John's like, oh, I get the hint. I'm captured. It's either die here or die later. You can just capture me. So he went over to the shore. They took him back to camp. And then they said, all right, John, so you're going to, well, they didn't actually tell him what he was going to do. They asked him, how fast can you run? And he's like, I'm fairly slow. And they said, good. and they took him to a place. They kind of put him in a teepee, locked him up for a little bit, and they got the tribe ready. And what they do is they take the children, the old women, and then, the adult women, and then the younger women, and then it moves to the old men, the younger men, and then the strongest braves. So they put them all in two rows in this kind of order. And so they turn them loose. So they stand John Colter between the two rows, and everybody in the two lines have weapons, sticks, clubs, rocks, whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And they tell John Colter, when we say run, you run. And, the tribe, their thing is to see how far he makes it. Will he even make it past the old women, or will they beat him to death before he gets out? And they say, all right, John, when we count to 3 and say run, you run. And they say, ready, 1, and John takes off running. And so he burst out before they were ready, and he was fast. So he blew through the line before anybody could even touch him with a stick. And he blew right out the end and kept on running. And he was fast. And he was highly motivated. So he's flying out across the plains, and the whole tribe takes off after him. But, he was fast. He left most of them in the dust. But as he's running, he looks behind and he sees that there's about 6 braves who are keeping up with him. And he keeps running as fast as he can. And he looks back, and then there's 4. And he looks back again, and now we're down to 3. And then he looks back, and there's 2. And finally, there's just 1 brave who can keep up with him. And he keeps looking over his shoulder. And as he notices that this guy's gaining on him. And he's like, oh, he's going to get me. So he keeps running. And he's looking back, and the guy's gaining. And the brave is a big, stout guy, and he's got a spear in his hand. And John's calculating, okay, about how close can this guy get before he can throw that spear and hit me? So he's looking back and running, and John decides, okay, I got a plan. So John starts to slow down, and the brave starts to get closer. And John plans when the brave is going to come into range to where he could hit him. So John plans, and he's like, okay, he's closer. And then now John turns and runs back at the brave. And he totally doesn't expect it. So when he throws, he doesn't actually overthrow. He doesn't throw it at all. He's about to throw. John turns and dives into him, knocks him down, grabs a spear, runs it through him, and then takes off running again and leaves him. And he runs as fast as he can. And the other braves come up, and they find their biggest, strongest brave laying there dead with his own spear through him. And they are as angry as, so angry. They grab their weapons and they chase off after John again and continue. John makes it back to where he started, and he dives into the water. And if you think about it, they have stripped him naked because they wanted to beat him and hit him everywhere with their sticks and beat him to death naked. And so he has not a stitch of clothing on. And when he gets to the river, this is October, November. That water is ice cold. He dives in the water and swims underwater, and he finds a beaver lodge. And when he gets to the beaver lodge, he sticks his lips out of the water just enough underneath the beaver lodge, because beaver, they have 2 openings under their lodge that lets them come out of the lodge into the water. So in the wintertime, when everything freezes over, animals can't get into their lodge, but they can go through underneath their lodge and swim and get a bunch of sticks that they stick in the mud and pull it back in their lodge, and they can eat all winter long. John, being a beaver trapper, knows this. So he swims underneath one of the lodges, and he sticks his lips out of the water just enough to get air under this little hole under the beaver lodge. And the beaver lodges, they can be 6-8 feet of big piles of sticks. So you can climb on top of those, jump on top of them, and never get through them. So John knows that he's got this big shield that has a hole in it that he can breathe through. So he crawls underneath there and he hides. And those braves eventually come, because they're trackers. You can't erase your tracks from the ground. And they, not when you're running for your life. and they follow his tracks to the water, and they're like, all right, he's in here somewhere. So they go up and down the river, both sides, looking for where he comes out, and they see that he doesn't come out. So like, he's in here somewhere. So they start walking around the edges and jabbing their spears down under the edge of the banks, trying to find him and, and stick him. And somebody actually walks up on top of the lodge and is jamming their stick in the lodge, but they can't get their spear down all the way through the stick. So John is safe under there. But the problem is, how long can you survive before hypothermia takes over and you start to die? So he's in that ice cold water. They search for quite a long time, and he stays, and eventually they give up and go away.
Amazing.
And when they finally go away, he waits a little bit longer just to make sure. And then he pops out of the water and looks around. He's like, well, I'm not dead by the Indians. And so far I haven't died in hypothermia, but I got to walk back to the nearest fur fort, which is 150 miles away. So he has to walk naked 150 miles to make it back to the fur fort. And he does. And he makes it back. I mean, it's amazing.
It is.
It is just absolutely amazing. So he does it. And that's part of the character of the people who are living at this time. And we have Jim Bridger, who is in Yellowstone Park, and he has a whole story. John Colter has a story. Hugh Glass, people have seen the movie The Revenant. I tell them the story about those trappers, and the trappers, they were back and forth all over Yellowstone Park. So we ride the trapper trails and talk about that kind of stuff. So we talk about the true story of The Revenant, not the movie version. And I mean, there's just so much to understand about Yellowstone Park, and that's not even getting into fishing.
Right, and we're going to get into that in a second. But I'm curious, what role did Montanans play in the founding of Yellowstone National Park?
Well, I tell folks when I'm in the backcountry, we sit around the fire and we talk about the history of the park and how the park was discovered. It was discovered over and over and over by a bunch of different people, but the final discovery that made it a national park was completely by Montanans. So I know Yellowstone is in Wyoming, and I'm probably going to ruffle a few feathers, but Yellowstone is Montana's park. It was Montanans who discovered the park. It was Montanans who went to Washington to make it a park, and it was Montanans who cared about it and preserved it as a park. And if you talk to a lot of the folks in Wyoming, when you talk to them, unless they're actually on one of the gateway communities that's making money from the park, the rest of them see it as a big federal entity in their state. And they don't really like that heavy hand of the federal government in their state. So they don't look kindly at Yellowstone Park. They see it as more of a nuisance and a problem. Yellowstone's what introduced the wolves into Wyoming. Yellowstone's what allowed grizzly bears to come in unchecked in Wyoming. I mean, so they see it as this thing that puts bad things into their state. So Wyoming folks don't necessarily like Yellowstone that much, but Montanans were the ones who really pushed to get it. So it was 9 guys from Helena, Montana, who came down and discovered, and it was called the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition. And Henry Dana Washburn and Nathaniel Pitt Langford. Langford was the territorial governor of Montana. Washburn was the Secretary General of Montana. I mean, we had the Postmaster General of Montana. We had all these high-ranking Montana officials who went and discovered the park and then pushed to make it a national park.
Yeah, that's great. And that was in the 1870s, correct?
It was, yep. So they did the Washburn expedition in 1870, and it was finally made a park in 1872. And there was another expedition after the Washburn expedition, which was the Hayden expedition, and that's a whole story in itself. So I mean, there's so much about the discovery and the development of Yellowstone National Park.
Yeah. Well, you've got Hayden Meadow and you've got Mount Washburn, and so these names live on.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. This is JP of JP Ross Fly Rod Company. We love listening to Steve and his guests, and we hear over and over again how much people love fishing small streams and the magic and tranquility that they get from being on the water on these small streams. Well, it's inspired us so much that we make fly rods for small stream fly fishing, and we've been doing it for 25 years. We make fly rods as short as 5-foot 3-weight 3-piece called our rock hopper. We make rods out of E-glass, S-glass, carbon, and carbon fiber hybrid. Check us out at jprossflyrods.com. And do me a favor, send us an email and tell us why you love fly fishing small streams so much. We'll send you a gift of a sticker pack or hat, and we'll even give you a discount code for listening to the Destination Angler podcast. We sure do appreciate your time listening to this ad. Check us out at jprossflyrods.com.
You know, Yellowstone is such a huge place, right? 2.2 million acres. I mean, can you even begin to give us a sense of the grandeur and the variety of the geography there?
Well, the interesting thing is with my pack trips, we run about 10 pack trips a year. And that's one every week from July 1st until about mid-September. And that is the window of time that you can get in the backcountry where you're not at risk of heavy snows. So in those 10 weeks, I have ridden a different trail every week for 10 weeks and never ridden the same trail twice because Yellowstone is that big. And these are 5-day trips where we're covering anywhere from 40 to 90 miles in a trip. So if you do that 10 times, I mean, that's an enormous amount of country that you're covering. And I still haven't seen everywhere. I mean, there are places that I would still like to go that are there's the gaps between where my trips go.
Oh, no kidding. And I got to ask you about the wildlife because I'm sure you've seen plenty. You got a story or two about some grizzly bears or wolves or something like that?
Well, and that's, I mean, the whole wildlife thing about Yellowstone Park, that's part of the reason so many people come to Yellowstone is to see and to experience wildlife that you can't see anywhere else. And in a wild state, and we call it a wild state, but it depends on where you are. So when you're along the roads, the animals have learned that people in cars are safe. So as long as you stay in your car, you can drive through and the animals won't wander away. They stay right on the edge of the road sometimes. So it's a little more like a zoo when you're on the edge of the road, except there are no bars. There are no cages.
Yeah, right.
And if you get out and approach the animals, you can die. So you got to be careful. And the one animal that you really have to be careful about on the road are the bison, because bison, they're so powerful, so strong, so fast, and they really don't have a great attitude. So, bears see you and they're like, yeah, I don't really want to be around you. I don't like people that much. And they kind of wander away. Bison, they're like, this road's mine. And when I cross the road, if you happen to be in my way or you push me, well, I will push back. And I had a friend of mine who used to sell firewood, S&D firewood, would have a semi truck, a small pup and a trailer, to head down into the park and deliver firewood to all the campground areas. And they were driving in on the Madison Road, and there's a bunch of bison in the middle of the road. And the guy was irritated that he had to wait, but that's part of working in Yellowstone, and he understood that. But there is this pickup truck in front of him, and there is a bison standing on kind of almost on the yellow line. And this guy in front of him in a dually pickup truck decided, I'm tired of waiting on this bison. I'm going to drive around it. So he started to drive around it, and he honked his horn. And the bison swung its head, hooked the edge of his bed with his horn, and ripped the shackle bolts and flipped the bed off the side of the truck.
Wow.
So it took the bed and threw it diagonal. So half the bed's laying on the ground. The other half is laying on the wheels and the frame of the truck. The guy's truck can't go anywhere. And now there's a traffic jam. So he was trying to pass. So he's in the middle of the road, got everything blocked up, and a bison ripped off his bed and then just walked off like it was nothing. Just
like nothing.
Easy, ripped it off and walked away.
That's incredible.
That's the power of the animals, and that's part of the animals on the road. The bison, you don't mess with. The rest of them, you're okay in driving through or around them, but you don't push a bison on the road with your car.
Oh, no kidding. How concerned are you with the bears and particularly the grizzly bears in the backcountry? When you're cooking and you've got horses and mules and whatnot?
We don't really have a lot of concern. There are plenty of bears around, and if you look at the pictures that I sent you, I have a number of bears in those pictures, and those are all pictures that I've taken. Those are all taken with my camera. That's not somebody else. That's me looking at them. And there are a lot of bears I haven't taken pictures of. But the bears in the park, we don't worry about them. One, that we practice very safe backcountry etiquette. So when we set up our camp, and these are Yellowstone regulations, but Yellowstone puts backcountry regulations in place because they're wise. So they tell you need to put your kitchen 100 yards away from where you sleep. So we put our tents 100 yards away from our kitchen. We cook only in the kitchen. Everybody brings their toothpaste and all their smelly items up to the kitchen area, and then there's a bear pole. So there's a great big pole or a couple of poles up in the trees, and we throw ropes over those poles, and we haul all of our food and all of our toiletries, anything that has a smell to it, goes up the tree at night. So the bears can't get at it. And then also, we do a good job of keeping our camp clean. So, when we're done washing the table, we wipe the scraps into a cloth and then put that in the trash bag, and then the trash bag gets hauled up. We don't burn anything in the fire that's food related. We just burn wood and paper. So everything is clean. So there's nothing to attract the bear into our camp. So if there's nothing to attract them, they generally don't like people in the first place. So all of our smells are there, and they just kind of avoid us. But even if we do get a bear that has been fed or that has gotten a treat from a person, we have in our livestock, we have mules, and we have big mules. Our mules are, anywhere from 15 to 17 hand mules. And a 17 hand mule, when his head is up, his head is almost higher than I can reach, and I'm 6'3".
Wow.
So they're great big mules. So they're big mules. But mules are very territorial. They want to protect their territory. So whenever we have an animal that comes into camp that's not part of the herd, because we have our saddle horses and our pack mules. So when we get a full group of people, we have 8 guests, 3 guides, and then our pack stock, we end up with about 18 head of stock in the backcountry, 18 head of horses and mules. And those mules are protective of those 18 head of horses and mule mix herd. So if an animal comes in, I've had moose come in, my mules all come out of the herd and line up side by side. So we'll have 4, 5, 6 abreast mules walk up to whatever animal comes into the meadow that's not part of the herd.
Really?
And first they're curious, but also they can be aggressive. So I had a friend of mine who had a grizzly bear come into his camp, and we were in the northwest corner, or he was in the northwest corner, and I was getting ready to go in. He was just coming out. So we met at the trailhead, and we were visiting. Hey, how was your trip? He's like, oh, you wouldn't believe what just happened last night. And he said a grizzly bear came into their camp, and it was on the far side of the meadow, and he was just walking across the meadow, and they spotted him. So then the outfitters were like, all right, everybody, I want you to gather up together. We're going to look big. So they all get together in one big group. I said, I want you to just kind of stand behind me here. And he yells at the bear to get its attention, make sure the bear sees, look, there's people here. And the bear sees it and comes walking straight toward him.
Wow.
And he's like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna make a bunch of noise. And, once we make a bunch of noise and we're all look big here, it'll scare him off. So the bear comes walking at him. So they all yell and make a bunch of noise, and the bear keeps walking toward him. He's like, oh. He said, all right, everybody, let's get the pots. They get all the pots and pans out. So now we're going to make all kinds of racket. And they start yelling and beating on the pots and pans, and the bear just keeps walking right at him. And he's thinking, all right, this bear's starting to get close. He said, everybody who has bear spray, pull it out. And he said, I'm going to stand in front, and I'm going to spray it. And every time I drop a can, I want you to hand me another one. And we're just going to spray this bear with bear spray until he goes away. But the bear, for bear spray to work, has to be 30 feet away.
Yeah, pretty close.
So 30 feet is 10 yards. I mean, that's close. And so it's not quite there. And suddenly he looks out of the corner of his eye, and coming from the left side, here comes all of his mules, and they get between the guests and the bear, and they pin their ears against their necks, which is a sign that they're angry. Their mouths are open so they can bite, and they go tearing across the meadow at this bear, and they're going to attack the bear. And the bear turns tail and runs across the meadow and disappears out of the meadow.
Like shoulder to shoulder? The mules are all together like that?
Oh, yeah, all side by side. Yep, they all come together as a group and just chase the bear off.
And nobody trained them to do this. They just do this naturally.
No, this is a natural instinct. Natural instinct.
Wow.
So if you go search online, you'll see where mules have grabbed mountain lions. So there's a picture circulating for a long time that there's a mule with a mountain lion in its mouth. They say
That's
this
amazing.
mountain lion saved. I mean, and this is ridiculous, that a mountain lion saved, or that a mule saved a person from a mountain lion that was attacking. And that's not what happened. They had shot the mountain lion, and they rode up with their mule, because they were riding mules, and they were getting ready to get the cat and skin it and take it home. And when the mule saw it, it knocked the people out of the way, grabbed it, picked it up, and threw it on the ground and stomped it, because that's what mules do to predators that are near them. So it wasn't a live cat, but if it had been a live cat, it'd have done the same thing, because that's how they are. And I lost a filly one time to a mule. And I didn't realize this was mule behavior. Not everybody, even though we're outfitters and we deal with mules all the time, there's special circumstances that this stuff happens. And I had a horse who had a baby, and we kept the baby with her for a little while, and then we turned her out with the herd. And I got a phone call from the neighbor that said, "Hey, we got one of your big black geldings that's chasing your little filly around. Maybe you should get her out of there." I said, "That's a good idea." So I went to pick her up. And when I went out to pick her up, one of my mules attacked her and grabbed her by her neck. And then I beat the mule off and protected the baby, but she had been injured, and we ended up having to put it down because of the injuries she sustained. But I went to the outfitter meetings, and I was really shook up about it. I mean, it was in the process of fighting the mule off and protecting the young horse and getting it away, I ended up getting my leg broken by the mule. And it was rough and rugged. I mean, it was a brutal fist fight trying to separate this mule from this filly and getting her taken care of. So, I came home, I was really shook up, and a week or so later, we had the outfitter meetings, and I went to the outfitter meetings in Yellowstone, and I just had to ask other outfitters. I'm like, "Have you ever heard of this?" 50% of the outfitters said, "I've never heard of that at all. I turn my little horses out with the mules all the time." The other 50% of the outfitters said, "Yeah, I lost a dog, I lost a goat, I lost," they just named all the different animals that were killed by their mules. And then other ones said, "Oh yeah, mules will do that. We've had them kill coyotes. They've chased wolves." I mean, they go through the list of all the things that these mules will chase off.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, I had no idea.
So we have these protectors in our camp all night. So when I go to bed, I have no worries. I sleep sound at night.
I guess you do.
Because we got these great big mules out there to protect us. And they are the biggest, sweetest things. Like, they love people. You can go out there and they'll put their heads over your shoulder and kind of squeeze you, and they love to be scratched and pet, and they'll follow you around. But boy, when the wrong animal comes in camp, they change their whole attitude. And the mule that ended up killing my filly, he was one, I trusted him, with my life. And when it came to getting him away from that filly, he didn't care who I was. His goal was to kill that predator, that small animal that did not belong in the herd. And he was willing to go through me to do it. So you could see the change in their brain when they go on the defensive. Watch out, stay out from between them and their enemy.
Incredible animals. Oh my gosh. Well, I hope your leg's okay.
Yeah, it healed up.
Okay. Good to hear. Who'd have thought you'd go out to Montana and end up getting a broken leg by a mule, right?
Right.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's talk about fishing. Give us a rundown, the best way to go through this. Like, can you kind of break the park down a little bit for us? Like, what are the main fishing opportunities in the park? Maybe just the easy ones that people might want to do, like in a day hike or something like that. And then we can talk maybe more about, those deeper backcountry trips.
Sure. Well, if you want to break down Yellowstone, we have rivers and lakes. And then to break it down from rivers and lakes, we have front country and back country. So there's a figure eight road system that runs through Yellowstone Park, and there are 4 entrances that tie into that figure eight road system. And a lot of our major bodies of water are right on that road system because the roads were originally designed as trails and were first wagon roads. So stock needed water. So they always followed the rivers, and the rivers generally had the easiest trails beside them to move along. So all the roads end up running along the river. So the main road coming in on the west is on the Madison River. The main road coming in the north is on the Yellowstone River. The east entrance comes in not on any particular river. It comes in from Cody, but the south entrance comes in along the Snake River. So we have the major rivers in the park all exiting different directions, and there's a road along each one of those. So we have some beautiful waters that you can fish right from the road. And there are a few places where there are particular signs that say, you can't fish this one spot. But most of the park along the roads is fishable. And then you got to start evaluating what am I fishing? So we have the Yellowstone is its own fishery. The Madison is its own fishery, and the Snake is its own fishery. So you get Snake River cutthroat, you get Yellowstone cutthroat, and you get lots of Madison River rainbows on each of those rivers. So you can kind of pick what you want to fish for in each one of those places. And then each one of those rivers has all the tributaries that run into them.
Right.
So once you get on the Yellowstone, the Yellowstone will take you to Yellowstone Lake, and you can fish all of Yellowstone Lake. And then there's a road from Gardner that comes in, that's the north entrance, and comes down through Mammoth and down to Yellowstone Lake. And there's a road that comes off of that and goes over to what's known as Cook City, a little town on the northeast corner of the park.
Great little town. One of my favorite towns.
Yes. So that road runs to Slough Creek and to the Lamar River, which are both tributaries of, well, the Slough is a tributary of the Lamar. Lamar is a tributary of the Yellowstone. So you get on the Yellowstone drainage, you can hit two major creeks or rivers from the road there as well. So there's lots of road possible fishing in the park.
Yeah.
And then each one of those, creeks or streams has other tributaries that are great to fish as well. So there's tons and tons of water. And that's what makes Yellowstone such a neat place, is being a caldera, being this big bowl, it just catches water. So it is a great feeder source for these major rivers that come out and feed the rest of the West. I mean, the Snake River, feeds so much of the West, and the Yellowstone as well. These are big, long, and they're still, well, I don't know, the one that's still, all of them are still wild in the park, and they run a long ways before they run into a dam. So when you're in the Yellowstone, you're on wild waters. There's no dammed water here. So it's pretty nice fishing. Once they leave the park, the Madison runs into Hebgen Lake, and there's a dam there. The Snake River gets dammed up way farther south. The Yellowstone is dammed over by Fort Peck. So or not Yellowstone, the Missouri River's dammed over by Fort Peck. The Yellowstone itself does not have a dam on it.
Yeah.
It runs all the way to the Missouri without being dammed, so it stays wild all the way. So it's pretty unique waters that you get to fish. So we start out on the roads. From the roads, you can park and hit any one of these waters, but near the road is usually where it's largest. So you got to plan on fishing bigger rivers. So Yellowstone, when you're fishing that, you're lucky. There are places where you can't cast to the other side. It's too big for that. The Madison, there are places there. You got to be a good fisherman to cast to the other side. So it's big enough that's the kind of water you're working with. The farther the backcountry you get, the smaller the water gets. So that's the difference, front country, backcountry. And then the lakes, there's a lot of lakes that are either on the roads or very near the roads, within a mile or two of the roads. So there's some great small lakes to get into the backcountry. Not too far into the backcountry. They're like day hike kind of things where you can just hike in for an hour, do some great fishing, and then hike back out.
Okay. What are some of your favorite, maybe overnight type of trips for anglers to consider?
Oh, well, overnight, so Yellowstone is about 85-90% backcountry. So once you get more than a mile off the road, you are truly getting in the backcountry. And there is so much water in the backcountry to fish that does not get hit heavily like those along the roads do. Anybody can hit the road waters. And the road waters, even though they're fished a lot, if you look at the number of people who come to Yellowstone, not that many of them are fishermen. There's a lot of fishermen who come to the park, but they say the average stay in Yellowstone is like less than 24 hours. So it's such a large place that a lot of people actually just passing through. They come in the south gate, they go out the west gate. They come in the east gate, they go out the north gate. They're just, they're squeezing through, and they said, "Hey, I did Yellowstone," and they did it in a day. And praise the Lord that that's how it works, because if they all stopped and stayed in the park would be destroyed, because we're getting, what was the last number I saw? 3.4 million visitors came through last year.
Okay.
I think that's the number.
It's a bunch of folks.
So if you get 3 million people coming through, and they're doing this mostly in 3 months, July, August, September. So that's 1 million people a month. If they all stayed and they all fished, the place would be destroyed, but they don't. So many of them are just cruising through. So you take those numbers and cut them way down, and then you get, some of those guys are fishermen. A lot of the fishermen they aren't fly fishermen, so they're not used to fishing a lot of these waters. They're really more lake fishermen. So they'll just go hit the lake and do a cast a bobber or whatever, or they find a little pool on the river and cast a bobber, and they're not really hitting the water hard, where they're really going to take a lot of fish. So the front country's getting some action, but then less than 1% of those go more than a mile off the road. So that's the latest statistic. So we're really cutting down the numbers by those who go in the backcountry. And those who go more than a mile off the road, a lot of those are just day hikers going out for a little bit and back. So when you get into backcountry where you're doing overnights, the numbers are cut way, way, way down. So the backcountry, you get more than 5 miles off the road, and there's such a small number out in the backcountry doing that in relation to the population who are passing through, that really that backcountry waters are those more pristine waters that don't get hit as hard. Now, there are some exceptions. So one of those exceptions is Slough Creek. Everybody has heard of Slough Creek. There have been so many articles written about Slough Creek, so many outfitters taking people into Slough Creek, that Slough Creek gets hammered in the summertime. And I've done the camp that we go to is about 9 miles in. It's up in what's called the third meadow. There's the first, second, and third meadow. And the first meadow, you hike over top of this big hill, and it drops you down onto a sharp bend in the river. And that is the first meadow. And that meadow goes up to where 2 other mountains or hills come down and neck down the valley right onto the river. And that's the end of the first meadow. And you break into the second meadow when you go over that next hill. And the second meadow is pretty long. And then it goes up to a narrow place where Elk Tongue Creek comes down into the park, or down into Slough Creek Meadow. And everything above Elk Tongue Creek is the third meadow. And that's about 9 miles to that Elk Tongue Creek. And then it's about 12 miles to the park boundary. So the last 2.5, 3 miles are that third meadow. So we go back to the third meadow, and that cuts off a lot of those day hikers who are just hiking over into the first meadow. Some people will push into the second meadow because it's 5 miles in. So they'll hike in 5 miles and fish and then hike back out in the same day. But that's a long day for a lot of folks. But nobody wants to hike in 9 miles and then hike out. So 20
That's
miles
a long
of
hike.
hiking just for 3 or 4 hours of fishing, you don't get that very much. So we really cut off a lot of those people that come back there. But even saying all that, I have been in Slough Creek, and I had 8 fishermen. We went down to the river, and there's just above the park is a place called the Silvertip Ranch. And the Silvertip Ranch is a private guest ranch, and they use horse-drawn wagons to get in and out of the park, or through the park to their ranch. And they take all kinds of different people up there. And they're not usually big groups, but there's, groups of 8 to 10 up there sometimes. So we had a group come down from the Silvertip. We had our group. There were 2 backcountry backpacker camps near the third meadow. One is right at Elk Tongue Creek, and one is up a couple of miles. Both of those were full of big groups of people. So there's another 4 to 6 in one camp, another 6 to 8 in another camp. And then there's the ranger cabin in Elk Tongue Creek. And sometimes the Park Service brings in dignitaries to that cabin, and they're allowed to spend the day and fish. And there is a party there. There's like 40 people.
That's a bunch.
In the backcountry in this one area. And I'm like, what happened to our, backcountry experience? It's gone. We're out here with 40. Now it's over 3 miles. So 40 people in 3 miles. There's plenty of water to fish, and everybody who wanted to fish could fish. And not all of them were fishermen, but it was just a lot of people, because, lots of times it's wives who don't want to fish, and it's the husbands are out, and, they're family groups, and they're playing in the water. But everywhere you looked, you saw people. And I thought, this is not the experience that I told my folks that we were going to experience.
Right. Well, where can you go?
Well, there are lots of places you can go. Now, I'm not going to just write off Slough Creek and say, don't go here, there's too many people, because the fishing in Slough Creek is still an amazing fishery. And if you have the opportunity, is one of the places to go and fish. The fish up there are enormous. And I have a couple pictures of the fish. It's beautiful. They're almost golden colored up there, especially you get through the early spring runoff, and the flies are really coming out thick, and these fish are getting fat. There's a beautiful time of year, and their operculum were red and purple. I mean, it was gorgeous, these fish. So they're definitely worth fishing, and they're not small fish. The thing about Slough is it's slow moving, crystal clear water, and the fish are enormous. They're 20, anywhere from, I've caught them 16 to 23, 24 inches up there. And for a cutthroat, that's a big cutthroat in this water
Nice.
up there.
Yeah.
So there's some monster fish, and you'll see whole pods of them. You're standing there and the water's so clear, you can just look down and watch these guys cruising underneath the water. And it's so much fun to fish there because they teach you how to fish.
Visual.
So because you can see everything, you cast your fly up, you got a good drift. It's not fast moving water, so you can watch your fly and make sure it's drifting nicely. The fish come up and take a look at it, and if you don't have a good drift or it's the wrong fly, they just drop back down and stay under there. But you can tell when you do it right and when you do it wrong. When you do it wrong, if you spook them, they spook, but they don't run away, like miles. They just dash back down to the bottom to their hole. If it's the right thing, when they take it, now there's some fun. Watching them come up slowly, suck that fly in. You wait because they're slow on the take. They don't grab it and dive and run with it. They go up, take it, taste it. Am I going to keep it, not keep it? Yeah, I think so. Now set your hook. And then you lift the rod tip, set the hook, and you got them. And once you got them, then you got them. They're not super hard fighters, but they're enough fighters that, they'll take and run.
Yeah. We did a show on Slough Creek, and I remember the guide that interviewed said that, when they take the fly, then say, God save the Queen, then set the hook.
Right. Exactly. That's the truth. Yep. And I've had days where I was impatient and ripped fly after fly out of their mouths. So that's Slough. There's so much, Slough gets pretty busy, but there are lots of other places that aren't busy like that, especially when it comes to the fishing. So you get down in the Beckler River region. There are lots of people there sometimes, but they don't care about the fishing. Beckler's full of hot water, so people want to go there and go swimming. So you'll be out fishing and you'll see somebody go riding by or hiking by, but they're not all on the water with you. So in Slough, or not Slough, but Beckler has so many beautiful places to fish and different fish. You can fish rainbows in Beckler Meadows. You go up the Beckler River Canyon, and there's lots of cutthroat up the canyon. You go over on to Mountain Ash Creek, and there's browns in there. There's just lots of fish to fish in Beckler, and it's an amazing, beautiful place. Lots of waterfalls, lots of thermal areas. Gorgeous. Can't
you see the Tetons from the Beckler area?
Oh yeah, yep. So one of the pictures I put in that podcast pictures for you is a view of the Tetons from Beckler Meadows, and it's pretty amazing to see the Tetons from the backside.
Yeah, and isn't Beckler? Don't you want to avoid that in the springtime? It isn't just full of horseflies and mosquitoes?
Oh yeah, don't go into Beckler until mid-August, really. I mean, we do that for horses. You can get away with it earlier hiking. If you take a head net, you can get in there even earlier yet. But I think the best time to go is mid-August to mid-September. By mid-September, a lot of folks are back in school, and your traffic down there kind of cuts down quite a bit. But you can also have snow in there in mid-September, so you do have to kind of watch the weather.
And this is the southwest corner.
It is southwest. They call it the Cascade Corner.
Okay.
And when it comes to the geology of the park, so Yellowstone was this great big caldera. It was, a big bowl, and it filled up with water. And then when it got so full, the water broke out. Where it broke out was the Beckler River Canyon. So when you go down in the Beckler Meadows, if you move the grass away and dig up some of the soil, you'll find black and white sands that are volcanic ash and rock that washed out of the Beckler, or out of the caldera.
Okay.
So that's where it all blew out.
Interesting. Okay, so you're about to talk about the Lamar, I think.
Yes, so the Lamar is another place that you can go. And I think right now the Lamar is one of the best fisheries at this time in Yellowstone Park. And the thing about the fisheries in Yellowstone is they're all changing. Yellowstone's a very dynamic place. We think of it as being, and I'm a young Earth theorist, so I think of it being about 600,000 years old or so overall. And others say it's millions and millions of years old. But if you look at it, it's it's not static. It's not just this volcano that sat there. It blew and it's gone and it's done. No, it's very dynamic. It is always changing. So there are places in the park that used to be great fisheries and now they're not. And there are other places that weren't great fisheries and now they've changed and they're better. So, you never know when you go to the park, what's next, what's changing.
Interesting. What would you say? Yeah. What's better right now?
Right now, I think the Lamar is the best fishing in the park. I think there are more fish in Slough Creek, but they have been fished enough that they are a lot more wary than they used to be. up in the Lamar, they still have that wild feel. They haven't been fished that much. They're pretty interested when you throw a fly.
Okay.
So, but the thing about the Lamar is a very sedimentary area. So if you sneeze too hard, you'll blow out the Lamar. I mean, it turns
Turn it
to
into
chocolate
mud.
milk. Yep.
Yeah. Gosh, I've tried to fish the Lamar several times, and every time it's been blown out.
Oh,
Every time.
So you want to hit the Lamar late August, mid to late August. July, we still get a lot of rain early on in July, and then toward the end of July, you get those last few afternoon thunder showers. Those are the ones that blow out the Lamar. By August, we get in kind of our drought season that we get every year. So you get up there in August, and you're a lot safer. Now, there's still a risk. I mean, there's some years August where we get nice thunder showers, which help keep the grass green and help all the rivers keep water in them. But when those thunder showers come through, it blows out the Lamar. But a lot of years we don't have that, and the Lamar stays clear, and it is a beautiful place. Now, we do a 6-day trip, a 5-day and a 6-day trip into the Lamar. One, we come up from the Soda Butte Trailhead, which is down on that road
Sure.
over to the Cook City. The other one, we come in from Yellowstone Lake and come up the backside over Mist Creek Pass, and then come all the way down the length of the Lamar.
Is that Pelican Creek you go up?
Yep, you're going up Pelican Creek to Mist Creek
Okay.
Pass, and then over to Cold Creek and Cold Creek Junction where it joins the Lamar. So up at that upper end, I think, and right there is kind of where the fishable part of the Lamar starts at Cold Creek Junction. Above that, the waters get very small, and there are fish up there, but they're much smaller. They're much more sparse. So it's better to start at kind of that Cold Creek Junction and go down, and that's the best fishing of the park. And that's what we call our Lamar over the top trip, because we want to hit that upper junction. It is so remote. There's so very few people that get up there and fish it that it's just a great place to go and be.
Sounds
and
amazing.
really get some good fishing in the park. But on a 6-day trip, if we get a thunderstorm, it takes about 3 days for the Lamar to clear. So we're still going to get fishing on either side of that thunderstorm and still be able to fish some of the time that we're on the Lamar. And when it blows, it clears from the edges first. So even, if it takes 3 days to clear, by the second day, you're getting fishable water again along the edges. And the fish are looking there because they're looking for flies. They're not going to sit in the dark, murky water. They're going to go to the edges looking for those flies because they're hungry. So, you can still fish it, but for at least a couple days, the fishing's pretty tough. But then it clears out again and you're back to rolling on it.
Okay. And how many miles is that trip for you?
Well, probably 40, 45 miles around there.
Okay.
Well, actually, it might be more than that. It might be 60, actually.
I got you. So, folks, give Shane a call if you want to do that trip. That'd be a long walk.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of bears back in there, I'm sure, right?
Yes, bears and wolves and bison, all of those guys live up in there.
Okay. Have you had some close encounters with wolves?
When they first reintroduced the wolves back in '97, there's some issues, and the thing was they brought in wolves, and this is a whole a topic we talk about around the campfire. Wolves in Yellowstone is its own saga. So in 1996, they grabbed 12 wolves from Minnesota, brought them down into the park, and released them.
Yeah.
And said, there, we reintroduced Yellowstone wolves. Now, we can talk about wolf ecology and the wolves that were here before those wolves were there and how they actually destroyed a species of wolves when they introduced the new wolves. I mean, there's a whole story about it. And if you want to hear it, I'll be glad to tell you around the fire. But
Okay.
they brought in the wolves in '96, and all 12 of them turned around and ran straight back to Minnesota.
Really?
Wolves are territorial. So they took them out of the territory, like, this isn't our home. They all turned around and went back home. So in '97, they tried it again, and they put in a pen, and they held them in the park for a while. And once they held them there for a month or two, then they kind of got acclimated a little bit. And then when they released them, they came out and they settled in the park. And they put in 13 pairs that time. So there's 26 wolves that they put in the park. And within, probably 10 years, those 26 wolves turned into 180.
Huh.
So you put 180 wolves in the park, and there are wolves everywhere. And those wolves, because they were a reintroduced wolf, they were under a special protection of the Environmental Species Act, or the Endangered Species Act, so they could not be hunted. And they couldn't be hunted even if they left the park. So suddenly Wyoming, Montana, Idaho are like, hey, there are wolves in our state and we didn't want them here. And the federal government said, that's too bad. We put them in and they have a right to be there. So you guys got to come up with a management plan. And the management plan has the plan that there are so many wolves allowed to live outside of the park in your state. And Wyoming said, our management plan is the first wolf we see, we shoot. And any wolf that leaves the park is dead. And their plan didn't get approved. And I just can't understand why. So the federal government said, well, that's your plan, but we're not going to approve that. So you don't get to shoot anything until you come up with a good management plan. So Montana made a good management plan. And they said, okay, we're going to have a quota. We take so many wolves. We have a number that we want to kind of keep around. So we're going to set this quota number that once we, reach that quota, then we cut off the hunting. And that's our plan. So until these plans were approved, the wolves had free range anywhere they wanted to go, and they felt like they had no predators. They could compete with a grizzly bear. They could kill an elk. A grizzly bear would come in and take the elk, and they would say, well, that's okay. We'll just go kill another one. So they didn't really fight with the bears. They didn't really feel like they were, being attacked by the bears. They could just give up and go hunt more. So they didn't really have, a predator, and the man wasn't shooting them or killing them, so they didn't have a predator there. So they felt like they were the top of the food chain. Well, when you are the top of the food chain, you get very bold. You aren't afraid of anything. And they weren't. They would come. We have stories of folks in Ennis and other towns around Yellowstone Park where wolves were coming on their back porch and taking their dogs off their back porch and killing them and eating them.
Wow, no kidding.
In the park, so I'm running pack trips, we would have packs of wolves come through at night and run our horses off. And we'd be out in the middle of the night yelling and hollering, trying to scare wolves off and get our horses back so that the wolves wouldn't run them down and kill them. They're like, well, they've never eaten a horse, so you don't have to worry about it. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Once they start something running, their chase instinct goes on, and it sure looks like a lot of hornless elk out here running around in the dark. So I'm not betting that a wolf's not going to kill one of our horses. So I'm, trying to keep the horses rounded up and the wolves away. And they would come in and take our fishing rods. So we'd have the fishing rod cases underneath our kitchen table at night. We just kind of put it all under there to keep it dry. The wolves would come in, knock the chairs out of the way, grab the rods and drag them out in the meadow and chew on them. Or the rod cases, not the rods.
Really?
Yeah, they were curious about what we touched. If I had a hammer that I used to drive a picket pin sitting beside the picket pin out in the meadow, they would chew on the handle. We had wolf tracks in front of our guest tents in the dust. So the wolf, while you're sleeping at night, there's a wolf smelling you on the other side of the tent wall, and you could see their dust in the track right in front of the door.
Well, what's it like now?
But it's changed. So I had fishermen, they were out, fishing. They'd be walking back down the trail, and there would be 3 wolves trailing one guy on his way back. He said there's one on each side of the river and one behind him as he was coming down the river. And he said, I just felt like they were hunting me. And I told him that's because they were. They were trailing you down just to see, can we take him? And Yellowstone is jealous. Well, there's no documented case of anybody being, a human being being attacked by a wolf. I'm like, well, I don't buy that. So I said, what is a documented case? Well, we have the body on the table with proof, that the wolf killed him. I'm like, well, that's never going to happen.
Right.
There's no way that's going to happen. Somebody's going to go kill the wolf, first of all, or the wolf attacks somebody and runs away. They don't follow them in. And if the wolf kills him, well, then he eats him. They're not going to have a body and a wolf side by side. So the chance of that happening is pretty rare. But what happened was in Montana, they finally approved a hunting season. And once they approved a hunting season, we had one fall hunting season, and they only took 6 wolves. That was the quota that year. So they took 6 wolves. The following summer, I didn't have a wolf approach a human being on our trips.
Wow.
They would see us as we're riding across the field or walking out in the meadows and bolt back into the trees. They had been hunted enough, and the wolves are social, so they communicate. And it was communicated to the Yellowstone packs that human beings are a predator. We need to avoid them. And they have. So from that point on, the wolf situation changed. And it has become a safe place in Yellowstone Park now with wolves.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, When you get up into like the northwest corner, the Gallatin area, how's the fishing up that way? Don't you take a trip up there, don't you?
We do. There's Sportsman's Lake that we go to up in that region. We fish the Upper Gallatin River itself. Fan Creek, which is a tributary, is another place that we fish. Specimen Creek is another tributary which you can fish. So there's lots of good tributaries up there, and the fishing up there is nice. The hard part is, especially when you go up in the Upper Gallatin, is it's unpredictable. I've had a fishing guide friend of mine who is, I mean, he's an amazing fisherman, an amazing guide. He's been doing it for 30 years now, maybe even longer. And he said there are days he's gone up in the Upper Gallatin and got skunked. Didn't catch a single fish. And I don't understand it. There are other days when you're up there, it is phenomenal. But what's the difference? I mean, it's
hard to tell, huh?
You can't tell. And I don't know what turns the fish on, turns them off. And he said it's not that we just didn't catch any. He said we didn't even see any. And he said that's a rarity, because lots of times you can scout and I mean, that's what we're doing. We're sight casting to most of the fish we're doing out there. And he said not even to see a fish is strange. So I'm not sure what happens up there every once in a while, but there's some phenomena that happens that the fish just disappear for a day or two, and then they're back.
They just turn off.
Yep, and he'll go in there another time a week later, and there's fish all over the place. So I'm not sure what makes that way, but it does happen. But when they're on, they're on. But that's the thing about Yellowstone. Again, it's a dynamic place. There are times I've been up in Slough, and we've had fishermen up there, and everybody came back, and they all caught 20 fish in an afternoon, and they all caught beautiful, great big fish. There's other times we've been up there, and nobody caught anything except for one guy he was just observant. He said, yeah, I've been watching these fish all day. He said, you can throw whatever you want at them, but if you don't have a size 22 midge, you're not catching the fish. He said, because that's what they're eating. And they sometimes get bug specific. And if you don't have the right, and they're sucking these teeny weeny things that you can barely get to drift, I mean, because they're so small, but they're just sipping those. And he said, you put that on the water. And he said, I caught fish after fish after fish after fish. But it was just, you got to match the hatch.
I was going to say, how selective? Is that very isolated to Slough? I mean, how selective are the trout typically in Yellowstone?
They're generally not that selective. I think it's common to Slough because sometimes they just get tired of being fished so hard that they pick a bug and say, well, this bug is a real bug. We're just going to eat that bug today. We're just not messing with anything else because I got jabbed in the lip one too many times.
Yeah. What are some of your top confidence flies? Maybe give us a sense of like, what are you doing in July, then August and September?
So early July is definitely match the hatch. You are looking for, you start out with your PMDs, your blue wing olives, things like that. You're looking for matching as close as you can the bugs that are hatching. And what's nice is there are tons of bugs in Yellowstone. So if you're not sure, just look around. There's stuff hatching and floating down the river. And if you don't, let's say you're a newer fly fisherman, you don't know the names of all the bugs you got in your box. So you'll watch one float by, look in your box, say, this looks like that, I'm going to throw that. Just match what you see and look at the size. Okay, I see what size it is. I got one of those in my box or something close. So just look at what you see out there and try to match that. And it's early July to mid-July, even into late July sometimes. If we have good water years, that match the hatch kind of stays. Once it starts to dry out, then your hatches change a little bit and your terrestrials become your go-to fly. So you get into August, and August is fun because we got some big grasshoppers in Yellowstone Park. So you're throwing these big, 1-inch grasshoppers out there, 1.5-inch grasshoppers, depending on what you find. But even with grasshoppers, sometimes you got to match the hatch a little bit. There are areas in the park where you'll pick up a grasshopper, flip him over and look, and he's got a pink stripe on his belly. So don't throw the yellow-bellied grasshopper, throw the pink-bellied grasshopper. And again, match what you can. So if you can find a real bug, grab it and use it. Just see what you got out there. But you're going to go with the beetles, the big grasshoppers, all your Chernobyl everythings, your chubby Chernobyls and your purples. And the thing about Yellowstone, most of the colors, the Yellowstone fish are not like Colorado fish. I mean, I'll just take Colorado as an example. I have guys who come up from Denver, lots of guys who come from Denver. They love, because it's close, they're 10 hours and we're there. So they can do a a short trip with me and still not have to take off too much work. So they'll come up and they'll bring these bright, chartreuse yellow-green things and these super purple sparkly things, and they'll throw them on the water and they'll fish all day, and the fish just come up and bump them with their nose, turn around and go the other way. But you throw out an olive drab or a tan or a dusty, these other muted tones, and the fish are all over them.
Interesting.
They like our more natural tan type bugs. Now, those bugs that they're using are bugs that work in Colorado because the bugs look like that in Colorado, but they don't look like that up in Montana. So Yellowstone, you kind of got to match the hatch. Now, we get what Yellowstone bugs like is if you're going to put some color, they like red, a splash of red. They'll go for the yellow and the orange some. But the other ones, they're not super big on them. They don't like the super bright colors.
Okay. Do you have some top confidence patterns that you like? What sizes and colors would you say?
So with me, my go-tos are Royal Wolf, Royal Trude. A yellow stimulator is a good one. And we're talking 16 to 12s for a yellow stimulator, 16 to 12 for an orange stimulator. The Royal Wolf, Royal Trude are 16 to 12, 16 to 14. Trying to think, my favorite fly is probably a parachute atom.
Okay.
That is, I keep a box full of those all the time. And I've had just, today I'm fishing with a parachute atom. I'm a one fly day. And I will use that same fly and I'll catch fish all day long. Now, every once in a while, they're going to be a little picky and they say, no, you're going to have to match the hatch. That's close, but that's not close enough. So I'll have to go and, pull out my PMDs and my sparkle duns and those kind of things.
Sure.
And see what I can do.
Do you kind of like those cripple patterns, like those sparkle duns?
Those work pretty nice, especially on Slough Creek in July. That is a good one in July.
Okay. Huh. What color?
Kind of a tannish brown.
Just a tannish brown. Pretty simple. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. And you mentioned some, like size 22 midge. I think you were kind of half kidding, but do you need to have something real small like that with you?
Yes, actually, I'm not kidding about the 22 midge. That's one that you should keep in your box for when nothing else is happening. Try throwing one of those guys on, especially if you can just see them where they'll come up and they don't break the surface. They're sipping right below the surface. Or you'll see them just sipping at the surface and you're like, I can't see any bugs floating down. What are they eating? It's one of those little bitty midges.
Tiny little midge, size 22. I buy those. I don't tie those. Those are too small for me. Oh my gosh. And where are the fly shops that you like in town? There's one kind of at every entrance, isn't there?
Yeah. Yep. Everywhere.
Okay.
So Southwest Montana is kind of the fly fisherman's mecca. So there's so much fly fishing water here in this area. You go over to Missoula and it's the Clark's Fork. You go down by Dillon, you're doing the Big Hole, the Beaverhead. Over Livingston is the Yellowstone and all of its feeder creeks. Then we have the Gallatin and the Madison. You head south just beyond the edge of the park, and you're out of Montana, but you're still right on that same area. You're into the Snake River. There's so much water around here that's fly fishing water. But there's a fly shop in every town. And you stop at the fly shop and they will tell you about the waters of that town. They are the most knowledgeable. That local fly shop and those local fly guides will give you the best information for what's going on.
For sure.
Now you get into Bozeman where I live and there's like dozens of them. So, you kind of have to be a little bit discerning. So look for your older shops. Those are the ones that they have the guys who've been around for a long time and they can tell you about the changes that have been happening. And yeah, that used to be good. And I read this in an article. Yeah, that was true 10 years ago when that article was written, but now, they know that.
And I've got a book because I'm heading out to Yellowstone this summer, and I got a book by Craig Matthews, who I think runs Blue Ribbon Flies in West Yellowstone, the Yellowstone Fly Fishing Guide.
He used to.
Okay.
Yep. He and Jackie ran the shop for a long time. They sold the shop. When did they sell it? 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer. At time, I'm not real great with time. You've been around for a while, and it seems like just yesterday. I'm like, no, that was 10 years ago. But Craig, if you got Craig's book, he's got the Fly Fishing Yellowstone book. Amazing. I mean, the guy.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
If you want a knowledgeable person about Yellowstone, Craig Matthews is the guy. And I don't know that he guides anymore. He's kind of retired. But if you can get a hold of him, he's definitely a wealth of knowledge for Yellowstone Park. But the Blue Ribbon Fly Shop is a great shop. There's numbers of good fly fishing shops.
For sure. Now, before we go, I got to ask you about the Thorofare, because you were telling me a couple of weeks ago that the Thorofare is one of those areas that has really changed.
Yes. So Thorofare. So if you want to talk about places that, years ago you used to think about where you wanted to fish, people would say, yeah, I want to fish Pelican Creek. I want to fish Broad Creek, and I want to fish the Thorofare. Those were kind of the best. They're like the rival of Slough Creek that we have now. So, Pelican Creek, everybody wanted to get up Pelican Creek and fish. And Pelican Creek is dead. It is, I would say it's fishless. Broad Creek up on the Mirror Plateau, absolutely fishless. I've been up there year after year looking. Are they coming back? No, there's nothing. The place is fishless. And then the Thorofare has gone through almost the same thing. Now, it's not fishless, but it has been really hammered. And it's not been hammered by people. It's been hammered by natural consequences and natural experiences. So the natural consequences are someone introduced Yellowstone lake trout. And the lake trout just ate 90% of the cutthroat in Yellowstone Lake. And all the Yellowstone cutthroat lived in the lake in the wintertime and went up and spawned up in all these other streams in the summertime. And, they're down in the wintertime, they're all eaten. So suddenly all of the tributaries of the Yellowstone River above Yellowstone Lake are struggling for fish. And at the same time, in 2000, we had a 10-year drought cycle. So from 2000 to 2010, it was a hot, dry, tough time. So it was hard on fish. The water temperatures, they were shallow because there's not a lot of rain, and then it was hot. So we were pushing 100 degrees, 104 degrees at that time. So it's hot, and it was those water temperatures were hard on the fish. The drought was hard on the fish, and then the forest fires. Because it's hot and dry, we have a lot of forest fires. So the forest fires, the forests are the tops are all burnt out of them. So now the rain's hitting the ground, causing siltation. So siltation into the water. So you throw drought, siltation, lake trout, high temperatures. It is the perfect storm for damaging trout populations.
That's too bad. So
I used to take people down there and fish, and we catch all kinds of gigantic fish down there. And now the populations are gone. And the thing is in the last couple of years, I've been in there and I've seen, we still have these great big resident fish that are hanging out there. I don't think they come all the way down to the lake to spawn. I think they stay there. So these big fish are up there, 23, 24 inch, great big cutthroat, but they're in different pockets. And if you can't find the pocket, then there's no fish. So you kind of got to know the area. And is it really worth riding 3 days to fish one pocket of fish all the way up in the Thorofare? A lot of people will say, no, it's not.
Better places to go.
Yeah. So they're there, but then you also find lots of the small fish. So you'll find fry, fingerlings, up to 6-inch fish. So you find these 6-inch fish, and then you find these 23-inch fish, but there's no 10s, 12s, 14s. And I don't know what happens to them. Are those the ones that are going down to the lake and getting gobbled up? Where are they going? Why don't we have these mid-range fish? And that's a question that we don't know.
Yeah. They say the ranger station job in the Thorofare is the loneliest job in America because it's the farthest away from civilization, the most remote spot in the lower 48.
It is. That's true.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's a place I've just always wanted to go, but, not if the fishing's not any good.
Well, then I tell folks, it's worth going into the Thorofare country just to stand at a place where you are 33 miles from a road in any direction. If you want to be remote, that's it. That is the most remote place in the lower 48 states. And when you're standing in the middle of that great big, and it's the scenery down there is fantastic. These gigantic, straight-walled mountains, the headwaters of the Yellowstone River running through there. There's wildlife down there, and then you get the historic cabin. There's 2 historic cabins back there. One is that Thorofare Ranger Station, and then you go just outside the park, and there's Hawk's Rest. It's the Forest Service Ranger Station.
Didn't know
And
that.
both those 2, they're super old. And Hawk's Rest, there was a movie made about some guys who ran Mustangs. I can't remember the name of the movie. They got wild Mustangs, they trained them, and then they rode them from Mexico to the Canadian border, and they passed through Yellowstone when they did it. And they stopped at Hawk's Rest because one of the guys that helped them train their horses and know how to do the backcountry stuff was one of the backcountry rangers who stayed there. He's an old guy, white-haired guy. So they rode through Hawk's Rest. So, you get a glimpse of Hawk's Rest in this movie, and to ride back there and see it, it's pretty amazing. Both of the ranger stations are really just the uniqueness of being that far away from anywhere. It's pretty cool.
So Shane, real quick, before we go here, I'm curious, how did you end up in as a backcountry outfitter in Yellowstone? How did you end up out west like that?
Right. So I grew up in north central Ohio, and I lived on the backside of my granddad's 640-acre dairy farm. And we had, some woods and lots of fields. So I grew up, I think I started camping when I was 7 years old. My folks let me start in the backyard. And then because it was on my granddad's farm, the older I got, the farther from the house I was allowed to go. So I was always camping. But we didn't have any horses. My granddad had a couple of just ancient horses that I'm sure they rode when they were younger, but they were just, by the time I was there, nobody could ride them. They were just old. And so I wasn't a horse person, but I was an outdoorsman from the beginning. But I had a little old lady down the road from us. So this is a rural area, and she had a whole collection of books that her husband had. And they were by an author named Louis L'Amour. And Louis L'Amour wrote Westerns. So I read all these Westerns as a kid. And by the time I was 13, I'd read every single book that he had written, and she had the whole collection, all of them. They're all paperbacks. And I read them all, and I thought, that's what I want to do, with my life. And a 13-year-old kid is saying, I want to be a cowboy when I grow up. But I live in Ohio. There's no way. And who still does cowboying in 1980, 1990 when I was growing up? And my dad took me out on a pack trip as a graduation present from high school. There's a place in Yellowstone, it's called the Yellowstone Institute, and they did these educational pack trips inside the park. And now the Yellowstone Institute has been taken over by Yellowstone Forever, and they do all kinds of educational things. I don't know that they do pack trips anymore, but they do all kinds of other road tours and hiking tours and all kinds of things. But at that time, they had the Yellowstone Institute did the pack trips, and they were led by PhD Professor Richard Clark. And Richard Clark told everybody his name was Dick Clark, but you say Dick Clark and everybody thinks, at least everybody used to think American Bandstand, a little short guy. And Dick Clark was not that. He was a bear. He was 6'3", 270, 80 pounds. He was a great big burly guy. Took a good horse to carry him.
That's a big dude.
And I went on this pack trip with Dick, and on the trip, we're our first night in, he sits everybody down and he asks you, why are you here, as you're sitting around the campfire? And the guests are saying, I want to ride a horse for the first time, or I want to go camping for the first time, or I just want to experience Yellowstone's backcountry and learn about it. And I said, I want your job.
Ah, did you?
And he said, what he heard was, I'm here to replace you. What I was saying is, I want to do what you do. And he hired me on the next summer, and I have been doing it ever since.
Good answer then.
Yeah.
Got yourself a job with that answer.
Exactly. And I ended up working for him for a lot of years, and then I eventually bought him out in 2006.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how about that?
Yep.
I'm curious, does that old lady down the street that you borrowed those books from, does she know what you're doing today?
She did. I don't know that she's still alive, but she did know what I was doing. Yeah. Yep. And she thought it was pretty amazing.
Well, you never know the impact you have on somebody, when you share something like a book or just some ideas with people,
Right.
I'm curious, Shane, before we go, I'm just kind of curious, what is like the one thing you want people to know about Yellowstone that maybe they just haven't considered?
Boy, that's a good question. One thing, I mean, there's so much about Yellowstone. I guess what I want people to do is, I think everybody should go and see Yellowstone. It's America's
Agreed.
flagship national park. It was the first national park, and it's an old. I mean, being first, you say it's old, but it's Yosemite was made a park before Yellowstone was made a park, but it was a state park. So actually, Yosemite is older when it comes to parks. So it's not the oldest national park, but it is the first national park. I think everybody should go and see the park. But when you walk into Yellowstone, drive into Yellowstone, and experience Yellowstone, know that you are only scratching the surface of a place that you could spend the rest of your life learning about and never get to its complete depths. It is an amazing place. And it was created that way just to draw us in and help us to really begin to understand God's creation and nature.
Great answer. Yeah, thank goodness for those people with their vision and their wisdom back in the 1870s.
Right. Yep.
You know, do you have any favorite restaurants in the area that you might recommend to folks? Hungry, thirsty anglers at the end of a couple days in the backcountry, where would you send them?
Boy, that's a good question. Usually I go home. When I'm done in the park, I head straight home.
There's some great little restaurants in Cook City. That's one of the coolest mountain towns you'll find anywhere. And it's not exactly undiscovered, but it's not kind of like overrun touristy, you know, it's very authentic, I think.
Yep, exactly. And anytime you can, find that small hole in the wall local restaurant. Those are the ones, like we have one in Bozeman. It's the Western Cafe. And it is still an old cafe. I mean, you go in there and the decorations have been there since the place was opened back in 1950. I mean, those are the fun places to go. And I'm sure it was a normal sized restaurant back in the 50s, but now it's a small restaurant. There's not that much space in there. But if you get a chance to go, it is good, just old fashioned, great cooking.
Right. Because Bozeman's gone very upscale last time I was out there.
Yep, that's true.
Well, man, it's been great talking to you, Shane. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate the chance to visit.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people get in touch with you?
You can go to our website, sunrisepackstation.com, and it tells you all about the trips that we offer, or you can actually just contact me. My number is 406-579-9642, and I love to visit with folks, and just like I'm visiting with you. If you got questions about the area or about Yellowstone, or you want to go on a trip, I will be glad to help you.
And you're still on Instagram and Facebook?
Yep, we have all the social media stuff. I am not super fast with that. I've hired a friend of mine who's also a Yellowstone angler and loves it. And he's actually going on a trip with me this summer. He and his dad and his son are doing a trip with me, and they help me manage that, because to put a cowboy in the office is not a good idea. And I tried doing it myself, and they said, you need help. So I got help.
That's what checkbooks are for, right? Hired out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Shane, thanks again for being on the show. I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow, and I know there will be many. Thank you, folks, for listening, and we'll be sure to post a bunch of these pictures that Shane's been talking about. And there's really some fantastic pictures on our Facebook and Instagram page, and we'll try to get a couple shots of some of Shane's favorite fly patterns out there for you. As always, you can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please tag a buddy. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain, a great little band out of Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.